Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amy Julian. I'm the director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. And I am excited to have you here today for strategies to support students interested in non-traditional fields. This is one of the 9 webinars that we are doing around our Super Strategies document that Brittany Boston will talk to you about. But if you do want to see those, we're going to share where the rest of those other 8 are, and we have 2 more left. Other 7 are, so we have 2 more left after today. With that, I want to go through just a couple little housekeeping items before I hand the floor over. You have a question box if you are on an app or an iPad that might be labeled as a chat box, but you do have a question box there, and we encourage you to post those questions in that question box. In addition, underneath that question box are 2 handouts. So you can see our FY21 ICSPS professional development flyer, and then the super strategies document themselves that we're going to be talking about today. In addition to that, you have different ways in which you can engage with us today. At this time, all of you are in listen-only mode, so you're all muted. However, if you raise your hand, we are happy to unmute you, or if you post a question in the question box, we will be able to pause along the way and respond to those questions. So with that, I'd like to welcome you again on this very warm, beautiful February day. Just kidding, it's 4 degrees and snowing where I'm at. And introduce to you our speaker. Brittany Boston is the Associate Director for Equity and Outreach at the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support and the author of the Super Strategies document. So with that, Brittany, good afternoon.
Hello. Ooh, author attached to my name. That's not something I ever thought I would hear. But yes, and I cannot take full credit for those super strategies documents, as it was lots of research and reading and looking into some strategies that different states are using. But yes, this is, as Amy said, a continuation of a series that we are doing on support strategies for special populations. So we are going to focus today on non-traditional fields, so students interested in non-traditional fields. But before we get too far, just in case you are not familiar with ICSPS or the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, I wanted to give a little background information on who our center is, what it is that we do, what our focus is. And so as Amy said, we are housed at Illinois State University, and we create, support, and deliver professional development for career and technical education professionals and programs across the state of Illinois. And that can take many forms, whether it's technical assistance, developing publications, webinar series that you are participating in today, facilitating program improvement strategies, but all of that professional development focuses on transition, recruitment, retention, and completion for students, and especially the achievement of special populations learners, which is what this entire webinar series has been focusing on. So as Amy had mentioned, there are some handouts in there for you to grab. I will have a few resources and items linked in this presentation. So those PDF slides are in there so you can access all of those links, as well as our professional development flyer for FY21. And again, that is another source of information. It has the final 2 super strategies webinars on there. Not that I'm excited that these are coming to a close, but we are in the home stretch here, guys. And then we also have a trauma-informed webinar series that we started this week, but it's not too late. You can absolutely register for the upcoming ones and watch the recorded version of the first webinar as well. And those dates and links to registration are in there, as well as some additional professional development that we have going on for the remainder of the fiscal year. So be sure to download those handouts. Okay, so what do we have in store for you today? So we are going to define what a non-traditional field is. What exactly does that mean for a student to be interested in a non-traditional field? And then we're going to talk about some things that we need to consider, keep in mind, for those students who are choosing to enter into a non-traditional occupation. So what are some bumps or barriers that they may encounter along the way? We're also going to look at ways to really inform and recruit our students into non-traditional occupations. And you will see for this webinar that that is where we're content heavy, is informing and recruiting, because when we're talking about non-traditional occupations, it really is about that exposure. It really is about presenting our students with all of the options that are available to them for a career path. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, but that's the road we're going down. And then we'll talk about, once we get these students into these programs, once they have made the choice, knowingly or not, to enter into a non-traditional occupation, how do we support them down that path? How do we help them to be successful in our programs and in that occupation? And then, as always, I'm going to open it up to discussion and questions. I always say that I feel that it is so valuable to hear from programs themselves, from the educators, from the academic counselors, the guidance counselors. I want to hear from you guys, any questions you may have or comments you may have. And then I'll share out some additional resources that I think may be useful to you as well. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So when Perkins refers to non-traditional fields, what does that mean? So a non-traditional field is an occupation or a field of work where an individual from one gender makes up less than 25% of the individuals employed in that specific occupation or field of work. So I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. I know that's a lot of language there. And I will provide some examples here in a bit. But you'll see also that I have linked the 2020 non-traditional crosswalk that is from OCTE, or the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. And so when you click that link, it will take you to a website that has a few items listed on there, one of which is a document that sort of gives you the background of Perkins V and non-traditional fields. It provides an introduction to the 2020 crosswalk and what exactly that is, and the methodology that was used to determine what these quote unquote non-traditional occupations are. How do we figure out that less than 25%? And then also on that web page, there will be a link to an Excel spreadsheet. And in that Excel spreadsheet, it breaks down all of the careers, and it breaks them down by gender, male, female, and what that percentage looks like. And so one of the great things, I guess you could say, about non-traditional occupations is that they can vary, they can fluctuate, right? Depending on the year, depending on the individuals that are currently employed, those percentages can fluctuate. So please be sure to check that out, if for nothing other than your own curiosity as to which occupations are considered non-traditional for which gender. So here are some examples. And again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. That crosswalk will definitely give you a more comprehensive list of non-traditional fields for each gender. But when we're talking about that non-traditional field, so for males, we're looking at cosmetology, elementary education, nursing, administrative support. And again, that non-trad comes from males making up less than 25% of the individuals that are employed within those occupations. And so for females, we're talking about engineering, law enforcement, aviation maintenance, welding. And again, there's others. Like I said, this is not an exhaustive list, but just to kind of put that definition more into a real world perspective as to what a non-traditional field is. Okay, so what are some things that we need to keep in the forefront of our mind when we are not only informing our students about non-traditional occupations, but supporting them along that career path. Some potential barriers, if you will, or some hiccups that they may encounter along the way. So one of the key things is this concept of unconscious bias. And so unconscious bias is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You know, we as humans have these assumptions, these stereotypes, these biases that we hold that we ourselves may not even be aware of, right? And not only can this unconscious bias be held by you know, adults, whether it's educational staff, instructors, teachers, these can be held by students as well. Students themselves can have this unconscious bias as to what is a typical career for a male or a female. In fact, studies have and research have been shown that at early as age 3, children start to make a connection between certain jobs and gender roles, right? So the thing that always sticks out for me is, you know, referring to law enforcement as policemen or, you know, firemen. Even as young as 3, they're starting to make those connections and starting to realize that, okay, as a girl, these are the things that it's acceptable for me to do, or this is my job, or as a boy, this is what I'm going to do. And at age 3, they're making those connections. And then not only are we talking about, you know, educational staff, students, parents also have unconscious bias when it comes to occupations, when it comes to their own ideas of what they want for their child, their career choices for their child. And so really making sure that we are making the effort not only to be aware of our own unconscious bias, but to inform students and parents, especially when we're looking at the secondary system, informing parents about and breaking down those stereotypes and those barriers for everybody. Gender equity issues, right? We know that there are gender equity issues when it comes to the pay scale, when it comes to salary, when it comes to assumptions of physicality or roles within an occupation. Gender equity issues are key within occupations as well. And then lack of exposure. I had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when it comes to non-traditional fields or occupations, career choices in general, research has found that the earlier you can expose a student to a career, to an occupation, the better chance, the more educated they are on it, right? We know that you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink, right? You only know what you know. So if you're raised in a household that only had, you know, your dad was a lawyer and your mom was a nurse, that's your background, that's your environment. And so maybe you choose to go into nursing, but maybe you haven't been exposed to the other options of careers that are out there. I never knew that underwater welding was a thing. I don't think I would have chose that as my career path if I had, but that was something that I had never been exposed to until I started working within CTE programs. And so it's really about exposure and education and information when we're talking about these non-traditional occupations. Okay, so what are some ways we can help inform our students about non-traditional occupations? So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we are presenting our CTE programs to all students, regardless of gender. And not only gender, but regardless of gender, ability, language acquisition skills, right? We want to make sure that we are presenting these options to all students. And again, talking about that early exposure, providing workshops, hands-on career fairs, career panels from local employers and their employees, especially if they are considered a non-traditional employee for that particular occupation, having them share their experiences, and anything really highlighting non-traditional fields, and have students participate, but also invite their parents, invite their adult in their life, that support system, because we know that whether it's the secondary system, we're talking about junior high, high school, or whether they're even going into the community college, your support system plays a huge factor in the choices you make, whether negatively or positively. That support system plays a role. And so again, breaking down those barriers, breaking down that bias, and just educating the students, the parents, and those support systems on the benefits and what those occupations truly look like. And along that same lines, making sure that we're inviting students and parents to program sites to sort of help eliminate any of those misconceptions or stereotypes that they may have about CTE programs and about these non-traditional careers. And allowing this to include presentations from role models within the field. So positive, attainable role models who can answer those questions that parents and students have, and maybe even those difficult questions that parents and students have when it comes to that particular career path. Really working with local employers to create those relationships to provide accurate information, not only on the skills needed within the career, but also those expectations that employers have of their employees, and what that looks like in the real world when you're on the job, and being able to lean on those employers to get those potential speakers and additional resources to help educate students and parents on these non-traditional occupations. Emphasize the potential earnings of non-traditional careers to students and parents. Money talks, and while we very much want everyone to be in a career that they love and enjoy and are passionate about, we also want to make sure that they're making a life-sustaining wage as well. And so sharing that information up front and seeing not only what that starting salary is, but hey, if you go on and you continue to get this certificate or get this degree, we can continue to bump up that pay, and what that looks like. And then again, that unconscious bias, making sure that we are educating counselors, advisors, and teachers on bias, both personal and institutional, to really help understand those potential barriers for students seeking non-traditional careers and how to help them navigate that, and break down their own bias and barriers when it comes to entering into those non-trad careers. Designing activities that include family members. Again, I touched base on that. That support system is really important, making sure that we're sharing information with them as well, and encouraging students to achieve educationally. And so we know that we want to make sure that that educational piece is there as well. And this is especially important for the additional special populations when we're talking about economically disadvantaged students, or even those underrepresented communities as well. So you've heard me use the term, I've probably interchanged quite a bit, so I apologize, non-traditional occupations, non-traditional careers, non-traditional fields, right? Those are all bureaucratic terms. Those are all from Perkins V and language that we use, when we're doing reports for ICCB or ISB. But when we're talking to students, when we're talking to potential students or their parents, they're not going to know what that means, right? They're not going to know necessarily what a non-traditional career is. Or I know a lot of times I've heard the two get interchanged between a non-traditional career or non-traditional student, which are two different things, right? If you're a non-traditional student, you're not maybe fitting that 18 to 21-year-old who's going into college, right? That's considered our quote unquote traditional student. And that's not what we're talking about here. So making sure that when we are discussing these programs or promoting these programs, let's just get rid of non-traditional altogether, right? Just promote the program. And obviously you want to have those conversations with students about some of the barriers or issues that they may encounter along the way. But like I said, we're promoting these programs to all genders, all students. There's no need to use that bureaucratic term. We want to make sure that we're using language that they understand and that they're comfortable with. And so when you're promoting those programs, also sharing out information about support services that are relevant for those who are going into a career that's non-traditional for their gender. And we'll talk more about what some of those support services look like, but making sure that we're being upfront with, you know, if you're a female and you're going into welding, we have this mentorship program that we also do for welding students as well, or whatever the case may be. And making sure that we are reviewing materials and processes to make sure that they don't inadvertently contain any discriminatory message. So as I had mentioned earlier, the terms of, you know, policeman or fireman, making sure that we aren't gendering any of our occupations inadvertently, right? We want to make sure that we're using that gender neutral language when we are promoting these programs and these occupations. Creating a section on your website that has specific information for students interested in non-traditional fields. And this can even include either success stories from previous or completed students themselves, testimonials, you know, a day in the life of an employee that is considered a non-traditional employee for that field, and really explaining what that process is like firsthand. You know, what that path looked like for them, where they are now, where their successes were, what they found to be beneficial of entering into that career path, why they chose that career path. Word of mouth is the best way to inform and recruit our students, because it puts it into a real world perspective. Like, that's something you can actually see and hear and is tangible. And so those firsthand testimonials or success stories are key. And then I'm making sure that we're also making those adjustments to any social media campaigns that you're putting out there on Facebook or any of the other social media platforms that you're using. Again, using that gender neutral language and those images, making sure that we're not, you know, being specifically inadvertently pulling in any specific gender one way or the other. And when we're talking about imagery for whether it's the website, whether it's social media, posters, if you're doing posters within your institution or your school, making sure that you have pictures of both males and females within the program, actively participating in the program. And then if you do radio or TV advertising, including those student voiceovers of both male and female voices as well. And again, I had mentioned this earlier, but really using gender inclusive language, because, you know, we're actively seeking all students of all genders, all abilities, all races. And so being conscious and aware of the language that we're using, and looking back at maybe some things that we had put out previously and really reviewing that with more of an equity lens, and making sure that there wasn't any advertent discrimination happening, or that our language was chosen very carefully and wisely. And then present real world settings in promotional videos, and not only promotional videos, but if you do, you know, if you do a career panel, if you do, my mind is in the the technology pandemic world. So if you do a Zoom where you have a career panel that represents individuals who are working in an occupation that is considered non-traditional for their gender, have them talk about the things that students may be too afraid to ask, right? So what's it really like to be a man or a woman and work in a gender-dominated field? What does that, how did you find that work-life integration? How did you make that work? What were some barriers that they may have encountered? How did you build a support system for, your family and peers to really help you navigate through this gender-dominated field? And having that real open discussion with these employees so that students can really get a feel for what this journey is going to look like for them. Okay, so we've informed our students about non-traditional occupations. We've presented the information to everybody. We've encouraged male, female, all of our students to come into the CTE programs. They've enrolled. Now, how do we help support them through the program and to be successful in the program? So when we're talking about students entering into programs for non-traditional fields, we want to make sure that we aren't inadvertently implying that they don't belong. And so what I mean by that is making sure that we're planning ahead when it comes to changing rooms, when it comes to sizes of equipment, safety equipment, so that we don't have any issues arise during the fact, during the program, during the course. So making sure that we have changing rooms for both genders or gender neutral changing rooms, and that those facilities are similar, right? Adequate and similar in their nature for the changing rooms. We don't want to have, a female changing room over here off the classroom, but then our male student has to go 2 floors down because, well, we just don't typically have male students enrolled in this program. We want to make sure that our facilities, our equipment, if I'm a female going into a welding program and the only safety gear that you have is size large or extra large, and I'm, 5'2", that's not going to fit me. And if it's not going to fit me, I'm not going to be able to learn the skills that I need to learn properly because my gloves don't fit properly, right? That's that nonverbal cues that we are sending to our students that aren't purposeful, right? We're not doing it purposefully, but it is those nonverbal cues that are saying, okay, well, maybe this just isn't for me. So making sure that we're looking at that and planning ahead to combat any of those issues before we get our students in there to participate in those programs. And then providing mentors and positive role models. Throughout this entire special population series, you have heard me, I have become a broken record, but you have heard me talk about how important it is for our students to build a connection. And whether that is with their peers, whether that is with an instructor or a teacher, building a connection with someone who understands what it is that they're going through and can relate to them and can be that additional support for them makes a huge difference. And so making sure that we are providing opportunities when appropriate and available to allow these students to not only have mentorship within their peer group, but also positive role models within that career path, within that occupation, whether it's an instructor or again, you've reached out to local employers and they have some employees that are willing to do a mentorship program. really helping to build those connections. And looking at alternative mentoring strategies. We are finding ourselves in a virtual world, and we've gone back and forth from face to face and back to virtual, and I truthfully honestly don't really know where we stand right now. But one of the key things that we can take away from all of this is that we don't have to be sitting face to face in a room with someone in order to have a productive conversation with them. So looking at web-based contacts, and a connection to those professional organizations. And that opens up such a wider range for us. So if you don't have in your local area, if you have a female student who is interested in going into aviation mechanics, and you don't have someone within your area, maybe you don't have aviation mechanics facility within your local area. You could reach out to someone in New York or in California or wherever and have that be an option for them to touch base through Zoom or Teams or whichever platform you're using to have those conversations about what that looks like to be a female in aviation mechanics and to ask those questions. So really continuing to utilize the technology that we have and using it to increase the awareness for students when it comes to these non-traditional occupations. And again, inviting speakers and presenters into your classrooms so that they can serve as a role model as well, and including information about expectations and that work-life integration. I have balance on there. I'm not crazy about work-life balance. That's a personal thing that I won't go into, but really making sure that we are having those conversations with our students about what the expectations are of an employer when you go into this occupation, what that looks like when it comes to integrating both your work life and your personal life. And every student is different. Every student's values are different, and so we don't want to make any assumptions based on these gender stereotypes. We don't want to assume that a male student won't want to go into early childhood education because, well, they're just, maybe they're just not that nurturing. We don't know that. Have that conversation with them. Again, we want to break away from that unconscious bias, those stereotypes, and really have these genuine, open conversations with our students. And then making sure that we are training our counselors and advisors and our educational staff in general to really understand the relationship between not only the personal and professional situations, but also those cultural situations that students can face when they're entering into those non-traditional programs and kind of what that looks like. And again, this is where maybe an individual who is already in that occupation or in that field can provide some feedback and some guidance on and can have those conversations and be of assistance in those situations. Okay, so I have talked for quite a bit, and honestly, I could probably keep talking because non-trad is, for whatever reason, it's one that's near and dear to my heart and I'm very passionate about. But as always, I want to hear from you guys. I want to know what questions you have or any comments. If you're working with students who have chosen a non-traditional occupation for their gender, what supports do you have in place that you have found or that the student has told you has been beneficial? How are you informing your students about these careers? What age do you start having these questions or answering, having these students ask questions about careers? Any questions or comments? I can keep talking, that's fine too. So I will actually give it a minute here, let you guys warm up and type in some questions and comments in that questions box. We are finishing out this special population webinar series. We have one in 2 weeks, and we'll be discussing teen parents, single parents, and pregnant mothers. So if you have not, please register for that. That link is in the handout section. And then our last and final webinar will be focusing on out of workforce individuals. And so again, we'll be looking at strategies to inform and support these individuals within our CTE programs. And then some additional resources we have, as Amy said, all of the webinars from the series have been recorded. And so if there's any that you've missed or want to re-watch, that is the link where you can find all of those. And then also within that page, there is a link to special populations resources. So please feel free to click over there and look at some of the other series that we have done regarding special populations and supports for them. We have a lot of recorded webinars on that as well that could be of benefit.
Brandy, we do have a
Yeah.
hand up. Oh, sorry, we do have a hand up and a question. So Colleen McLaughlin, I'm going to unmute you so you're able to ask your question. So you are now unmuted. Welcome to the webinar, Colleen. Her statement was that she uses their job center and arranges conversations with our local community college.
Yeah, awesome. That's great.
Yes, those workforce partners are very essential.
Mm-hmm.
Colleen, did you want to add anything to that comment? I'm going to go ahead. She muted herself, so we'll go ahead and move on. And then another individual is asking if we have any advice on making those contacts to create panels to meet with our students. Do you suggest reaching out directly to individuals or to companies and asking them for contacts?
Yeah, so Sandrine, I'm not sure if you are from a community college or a high school or secondary system, but depending on the institution that you are from, I will say those advisory committees that are put together for each CTE program, that would be my first stop. That would be my suggestion there. Because ideally, within those advisory committees, you should have employers at the table for those conversations. And so that would be a great way to get any input from them of potential employees that may be interested in participating in that. If your advisory committee is maybe lacking in some employer representation, I absolutely don't see anything wrong with reaching out to local employers in your area. One thing that I will suggest is making sure that everyone is clear and concise with their language, and that the message that you are sending to one employer is the same message that you are sending to another. But yeah, don't be afraid to send somebody an email, somebody at Caterpillar or wherever, and send them an email and say, hey, I have this CTE program and we'd love to hear some viewpoints from people actually in the field. Would you be interested in ... Absolutely.
I also encourage you to consider organizations. There's a lot of statewide organizations, Women in Drones, Women in Agriculture, that do want to do recruiting and talk about the benefits of those particular career pathways or programs of study. So look into those organizations if you're looking for somebody in your particular area. And also when you're looking at the ask to business, be sure that you consider that as a potential stakeholder. So not only are businesses wanting to assist us and support education, but what can we do to support them? So I think that's always framing that ask is sometimes a little challenging for the education field, saying, oh, we want these things, but at the same time, what do you see the benefit to that employer being or that business being, and make it be a relationship instead of just a single ask of a single panel discussion. So next up, my Blackburn College has very strong alumni group, and I can send questions to any job question jobs. You never know if you can, yes, that's a great idea, to look at your alumni and look at your alumni as to where they're placed and how they would like to support. That's also, and I know Brittany has talked about this on several webinars, your marketing, the best marketing for your program is word of mouth marketing, and really having those alumni or student success stories is really a great way to market your program. Thank you for that comment. Next one for you, Brittany, is typically whose job is it to make sure that the program/courses have the right and adequate equipment to fit both males and females?
So when you're saying equipment, are you meaning as far as like scrubs and safety equipment? Or are you meaning actual facility usage? Because if you're talking about the facilities, so if we're talking about changing rooms, restrooms, those, that is, and Amy, please correct me if I'm wrong, that is the responsibility of your institution to make sure that those facilities are comparable and adequate. And when you're talking about safety equipment, scrubs, well, I guess it's the same answer. It really is the role of your institution, whether it is the secondary level when it comes to the district or the high school or community college, making sure that they are providing comparable and adequate facilities for males and females.
And Brittany, you're absolutely correct. It is the responsibility of the institution. When you look at physical accommodations, those really do fall to the college or the high school, because that is part of your civil rights, to be sure you're not discriminating against one gender over another. But what sometimes happens is that idea of those large welding gloves or the equipment that just doesn't quite fit. And there's a great study that was done by the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, and it was in the Oregon state. And there was a school that had a welding program that just didn't have any success recruiting women into their program, and they hired a female welding teacher, and the teacher came in and said, I just don't understand, why don't we have women in welding? Because as an instructor for welding, she's very passionate about welding and saw all the benefits to welding. Well, when she went into her lab and she looked around and she realized that all the gloves were size large, all the coats were size large, and if you consider and look around at a high school size female, not a lot of them are going to fit into a size large or a men's size large coat or gloves. I mean, even me, who I'm an old woman, my hands do not fit into a men's size large welding glove. I need a smaller glove. So she did some work with her alumni. She did some work with her student recruitment, and she got some girls to come in and try welding, but also got the equipment so it fit. Especially looking at those welding shields that they wear, you need to make sure that those are not only covering them and protecting their faces, but also covering them so they're comfortable so they can do their work. If you look into this amazing study, what you'll find is that her recruitment paid off, and her enrollment for women, first year she started with 4, then she doubled to about 18, then she doubled to about 36, and her recruitment and retention has continued to go up. So making students feel comfortable does play a big role in whether or not students see themselves in those occupations or those classes, and they stay in those occupations and those classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also encourage you, if you are interested in learning more and kind of diving into the facilities piece of that, we do on our website have a tab labeled is it civil rights review, self-assessment, I believe is what it is. Jump on there, and there is a plethora of information when it comes to facilities and what that looks like, not only for genders, but for students with disabilities, looking at the resources and information that you are putting out into your community, and how, depending on the makeup of the population of individuals in your community, what languages those need to be provided in. So that is a whole other webinar that we could do as well. But definitely please check that out, and see what other information is out there. And if you have any questions, I will put up my contact information. You can contact me or Amy, and we'd be happy to answer any additional questions you may have in regards to facilities and equipment along those lines of civil rights.
And Brittany, I did throw that link into the chat. So if you go to that website, it's on our website. Civil Rights Self-Assessment is after ICSPS.illinoisstate.edu. If you are from the post-secondary system, just scroll down a little bit. There it says Community College Self-Assessment Tool. If you are from the secondary system, scroll down a little bit, and there is a secondary education self-assessment tool. So if you have any questions with that, again, we're here to assist and support you as a career and technical education person. So just let us know, but those are great resources that are available to you on our website.
All right, well, I put up my email address. So if you have any questions, if you play around on our website and maybe aren't finding a resource or information on something that you think we should be discussing, let us know. Let us know. We absolutely want to hear from the field and what your needs are. You guys are the ones that are engaging with students on a daily basis. So please let us know if there is any additional professional development or support that we can provide to you. And if are there any more questions or comments? If not, you guys get an extra 15 minutes back to your day.
I don't see any additional questions. There's some nice thank yous coming in. So looks like everyone's anxious to get out into that bright, warm sunshine that they might have in their part of the state.
We're all pretending we're in sunny Florida right now. So thank you guys so much. And again, please be sure to download the slides so you can get registered for the additional webinars within this series. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.